The coffee was still steaming when Liora delivered the verdict that would change everything. We sat across from each other at our kitchen table, the same table where we'd planned our wedding, discussed buying the house, argued about money more times than I could count. Now she was ending it all with the kind of clinical precision she usually reserved for her marketing presentations. "We're better as friends, Cole," she said, not looking up from her phone. Her manicured fingers scrolled through what I now realize were probably messages from him. "This isn't working anymore. We want different things." I set down my mug carefully, watching the morning light catch the diamond on her wedding ring. The ring I'd saved 6 months to buy, working overtime at a job I hated just to afford something worthy of her expectations. "Different things?" I repeated. "Like what?" "Ambition, success, a future that actually goes somewhere." She finally looked at me, and her green eyes held no warmth, no regret, just the cool assessment of someone who'd already moved on. "You're a good person, Cole, but good doesn't pay for the life I want." That's when she told me about Griffin Carrow, hedge fund manager, yacht owner, man whose watch probably cost more than my car. She didn't say she'd been having an affair, but the way she talked about him, like he was salvation wrapped in a custom suit, made it obvious this wasn't some sudden revelation. "Griffin thinks I have real potential in high-end PR. He's offered me a position with his investment firm. It's an incredible opportunity." "Griffin," I said slowly. "Your business mentor, Griffin? The guy who's been giving me startup advice for the past year?" She had the grace to look uncomfortable for exactly 3 seconds. "It just happened, Cole. Sometimes these things just happen." I wanted to laugh or scream. Instead, I nodded, like this made perfect sense. "So, when do you want me to move out?" "Actually, I thought you could keep the apartment. Griffin has a place downtown that's much more suitable for my new position." She was already mentally gone, already living in whatever penthouse paradise he'd promised her. "I'll come by this afternoon to get my things." And just like that, my marriage was over, reduced to logistics and forwarding addresses. I watched her pack that afternoon, moving through our home like she was clearing out a storage unit. She took the good wine, the art we'd bought together, even the coffee maker that had been a wedding gift from my parents. When she was done, half the apartment looked like it had been surgically removed. "I hope we can stay friends," she said at the door, her Louis Vuitton suitcase in hand. "You're a good man, Cole. You deserve someone who appreciates that." I almost said something then, almost pointed out that she'd been that someone for 5 years, almost asked if Griffin knew about the credit card debt she'd hidden, or the way she cried during romantic movies, or how she sang off-key in the shower every morning. Instead, I said, "We're better as friends. You're right." She smiled like I'd given her permission to be happy. Exactly. The door closed, and I was alone with the student loans, the struggling startup in the spare bedroom, and the sudden understanding that my wife had just demoted me to a supporting role in my own life. I poured myself a drink from the bottle of bourbon she'd left behind, probably because it wasn't expensive enough for her new lifestyle, and sat in the half-empty living room. My laptop was still open on the coffee table, showing the latest iteration of my encryption software. The same software I'd been developing with Griffin's guidance. The same software he'd been so interested in, asking detailed questions about algorithms and market applications. The same software I now realized he'd been studying for reasons that had nothing to do with mentorship. I took another sip of bourbon and opened my laptop. If Liora wanted us to be friends, I'd honor that request. I'd be the best friend she'd ever had. The kind of friend who respected boundaries, who didn't interfere in her new relationship, who minded his own business and focused on his own success. The kind of friend who noticed things, starting with the monitoring software I'd just discovered on my hard drive. Software that had been installed 6 months ago, right around the time Griffin started mentoring me. Software that had been transmitting my business plans, my investor conversations, my pivot strategies directly to an IP address registered to Carrow Capital Management. I smiled for the first time since breakfast. Liora was right about one thing. We were much better as friends, and friends, as I was about to learn, could be far more dangerous than enemies. 3 weeks into my new life as a single man, I discovered that betrayal comes in layers. The first layer was obvious: my wife leaving me for a richer man. The second layer took some digging. Griffin Carrow hadn't just stolen my wife. He'd been systematically harvesting my ideas for months. I found the evidence on a Tuesday morning while running a security audit on my systems. The monitoring software was sophisticated, almost invisible, designed to capture keystrokes, screenshots, and file transfers. Every investor call I'd made, every pivot strategy I'd developed, every breakthrough I'd achieved in my spare bedroom office, all of it had been streaming directly to Griffin's servers. My phone rang. Griffin's name appeared on the screen, and for a moment I considered letting it go to voicemail. Then I remembered that friends answer their phones. "Cole, my boy!" His voice carried that particular brand of confidence that comes with inherited wealth and unearned privilege. "How are you holding up? Liora mentioned you two decided to separate. Terrible shame." "These things happen," I said, watching lines of code scroll across my screen. Each line represented another piece of intellectual property he'd stolen. "Sometimes people just want different things." "Exactly right. Very mature perspective." He paused, and I could almost hear him calculating his next move. "Listen, I've been thinking about your encryption project. Have you considered pivoting toward financial applications? There's enormous potential in that space." I almost laughed. He was still mining for information, even now. "Actually, I'm exploring some new directions. Military applications, government contracts. The Defense Department has some interesting challenges in secure communications." The silence stretched long enough for me to know I'd surprised him. "Military work," he said finally. "That's quite a departure from your original vision." "Sometimes the best opportunities come from unexpected directions," I said. "Speaking of which, how's Liora settling into her new position?" "Wonderfully. She's a natural at client relations. We're taking some potential investors out on the yacht this weekend, actually. Liora has such a gift for making people feel comfortable with high-stakes decisions." I bet she did. I'd watched her practice that gift for 5 years, turning charm into currency whenever we needed something we couldn't afford. Now she was using it to help Griffin separate rich people from their money. "That sounds perfect for her," I said. "She always did love the water." After hanging up, I sat back and considered my options. I could confront them directly, demand explanations, threaten legal action. But that would be the reaction of a bitter ex-husband, not a friend. And I'd promised to be a friend. Friends, I realized, had different advantages. Friends were trusted. Friends weren't seen as threats. Friends could observe without being suspected of ulterior motives. I spent the next week learning everything I could about Griffin's business. His hedge fund managed about $200 million in assets, mostly from Austin's tech elite and old oil money. His art collection was legendary, $12 million worth of paintings and sculptures that served as both passion project and loan collateral. His lifestyle was carefully curated for maximum impact. The downtown penthouse, the yacht, the vintage Porsche, the country club membership that cost more than most people's annual salary. It was an impressive facade. But facades, I was learning, often hide structural weaknesses. The first crack appeared when I started researching his art collection. I'd recently connected with Dr. Elise Park, a forensic specialist who'd expressed interest in investing in my company. During one of our meetings, I mentioned Griffin's collection. Just friendly conversation between business associates. "Carrow?" She frowned, scrolling through something on her tablet. "That name sounds familiar." "Oh, here it is. We've been tracking some sophisticated forgeries that have been circulating in the Southwest. Several pieces that match descriptions from his collection." She showed me photographs from an FBI bulletin. 3 paintings that I recognized from Griffin's penthouse, pieces he'd proudly shown off during dinner parties, explaining their provenance and historical significance. According to the federal investigation, they were elaborate fakes, worth maybe $10,000 instead of the millions he'd claimed. These forgeries are so good that most private collectors would never know, Dr. Park explained. But they're all from the same forger, and we've been building a case for months. The original pieces were stolen from European museums decades ago. I studied the images, calculating possibilities. Griffin's art collection wasn't just his passion, it was collateral for his business loans, security for his lifestyle, proof of his sophisticated taste. If even part of it was fraudulent, the implications would ripple through every aspect of his carefully constructed world. "This is fascinating," I said. "Is there a way to report suspected forgeries anonymously?" "Absolutely. In fact, we encourage it. Art fraud is notoriously difficult to prosecute without insider information." That evening, I drafted a detailed report identifying the 3 pieces in Griffin's collection that matched the FBI's bulletin. I included photographs from his social media posts, exhibition catalogs from his charity events, and insurance appraisals that listed inflated values. The report was thorough, professional, and completely anonymous. I submitted it at midnight, then poured myself a drink and waited. Friends, I was learning, sometimes had to make difficult decisions for each other's own good. And Griffin was about to learn just how good a friend I could be. The FBI moved faster than I expected. Within a week, Griffin's art collection was making headlines in the Austin Business Journal. "Local hedge fund manager cooperates with federal art fraud investigation," read the front page story that appeared on a Thursday morning. I was drinking coffee in my favorite downtown cafe when I saw Griffin's photograph staring back at me from the newspaper rack. The article was carefully worded, no accusations, just facts about an ongoing investigation and Griffin's willingness to assist authorities. But in Austin's tight-knit financial community, being associated with a federal fraud investigation was like being diagnosed with a contagious disease. My phone buzzed with a text from Liora. "Did you see the news? This is insane. Griffin says it's all a misunderstanding." I typed back, "I'm sure it will work out fine. These investigations usually do." What I didn't tell her was that I'd spent the morning watching Griffin's world begin to unravel in real time. His primary lender had frozen his credit lines pending the investigation's outcome. The country club had quietly suggested he take a temporary leave from his board position. 3 major investors had requested meetings to reassess their portfolio allocations. But the real damage was social. Austin's elite moved in small circles, and news traveled at the speed of gossip. By Friday afternoon, Griffin and Liora's weekend yacht party had been mysteriously canceled. By Monday, 2 of his largest clients had transferred their accounts to competing firms. I watched it all unfold from my new office, a modest space in a co-working building downtown, but with actual employees now and a view that didn't include my spare bedroom. My Defense Department contact had come through with a preliminary contract worth more than I'd made in the previous 3 years combined. Suddenly, investors who'd ignored my calls were returning my messages within hours. "It's remarkable timing," said James Morrison, a venture capitalist who'd previously dismissed my company as interesting but premature. We were having lunch at the same restaurant where Griffin used to hold his mentorship sessions. "The military applications for your encryption protocols are exactly what the market needs right now." I nodded, cutting into my steak. Sometimes you have to pivot when opportunities present themselves. Speaking of opportunities, I heard about Griffin Carrow's situation. Terrible business. I hope it doesn't affect your relationship with him. "Griffin's been a valuable mentor," I said carefully. "But I've learned that the best mentorship is knowing when to become independent." That afternoon, I got a call from Griffin himself. His voice carried a tension I'd never heard before, the careful control of someone trying not to sound desperate. "Cole, I need to ask you something, and I want you to be completely honest with me." Of course. This art investigation, have you heard anything? Any rumors, any speculation about who might have tipped off the authorities? I paused, as if considering the question seriously. Nothing specific. But you know how these things work. Someone sees something suspicious, makes a call. Could have been anyone. The timing is just so convenient, he said. Right when my business is expanding. Right when Liora and I are making plans together. It feels targeted. Paranoia isn't going to help you right now, I said. Focus on cooperating with the investigation. If the pieces are authentic, you'll be vindicated. Another long pause. What if they're not? The question hung between us like a confession. Then you deal with the consequences, I said. That's what adults do. After the call ended, I sat back in my chair and considered the beautiful irony of the situation. Griffin had spent months studying my weaknesses, learning my vulnerabilities, positioning himself to take everything I'd built. Now he was asking me for advice on how to handle the destruction of everything he'd built. The difference was that his destruction was happening in public, with federal investigators and newspaper headlines and social media speculation. My humiliation had been private, contained to a kitchen conversation and a half-empty apartment. I preferred my version. That evening I drove past Griffin's penthouse building. The lights were on, and I could see figures moving behind the floor-to-ceiling windows. Probably Liora. Probably trying to comfort him. Probably beginning to realize that yacht parties and country club memberships weren't permanent features of the landscape. My phone buzzed with another text from her. Can we talk? I know this is weird timing, but I'm worried about you. This whole situation with Griffin is affecting everyone. I stared at the message for a long time before responding. I'm doing well. Thanks for asking. Focus on supporting Griffin right now. He needs friends. The irony wasn't lost on me. She was worried about me while her new life was collapsing around her. She wanted to talk while I was building something she'd never thought I was capable of achieving. But friends, I reminded myself, respected boundaries. Friends didn't take advantage of other people's vulnerable moments. Friends waited patiently for the right time to offer help, and I was going to be the best friend she'd ever had. The Pentagon meeting changed everything. I sat in a conference room that probably cost more than my annual salary, surrounded by people whose job titles were classified and whose handshakes could launch companies or destroy careers. My encryption software wasn't just interesting anymore, it was essential. Mr. Vanton, said Colonel Patricia Hayes, the project director whose approval could transform my spare-bedroom startup into a defense contractor overnight. Your protocols solve problems we've been wrestling with for years. The applications for secure field communications are extraordinary. I nodded, trying to project confidence while my mind raced through the implications. We've designed the system to be scalable and adaptable. Whether you're securing communications for a small unit or an entire theater of operations, the encryption adapts in real time. And the source code? This would require the highest levels of security clearance. I understand completely. My team is prepared for whatever vetting process you require. 3 hours later, I walked out of that building with a preliminary contract worth $8 million and a timeline that would require me to hire 12 employees within 60 days. My company wasn't just surviving anymore, it was thriving in ways I'd never imagined possible. I called Jules Martinez, my former coworker, and the only person who'd believed in my project when it was just lines of code on a laptop. We got it, I said when she answered. The Defense Department contract, all of it. Holy shit, Cole, holy shit. Her excitement crackled through the phone. Do you realize what this means? You're going to be rich, actually legitimately rich. We're going to be rich, I corrected. I need a CTO, and you're the only person I trust with this level of responsibility. The silence stretched long enough that I thought the call had dropped. Then, you're serious. You're actually offering me a job. I'm offering you a partnership, 20% equity, full benefits, and the chance to build something that actually matters. When do I start? How about now? While Jules was giving notice at her current job, I was dealing with a different kind of transition. Griffin's legal troubles were escalating beyond the art fraud investigation. His former assistant had contacted federal prosecutors with evidence of securities violations dating back 7 years. The FBI had seized his computers, frozen his accounts, and begun interviewing his clients about potential financial misconduct. The yacht sold first, then the Porsche, then the country club membership that had defined his social status for the better part of a decade. I learned about each sale through Austin's efficient gossip network, but also through more direct observation. My new office was 6 blocks from Griffin's building, and I'd developed a habit of walking past during lunch. The changes were subtle but unmistakable. Fewer expensive cars in the parking garage, security guards who looked bored instead of alert, a general sense of decline that seemed to emanate from the building itself. Liora's Instagram told a similar story. The yacht photos disappeared first, replaced by inspirational quotes about resilience and personal growth. The designer handbags vanished from her posts. The restaurant check-ins shifted from Michelin-starred establishments to trendy but affordable spots that accepted reservations from ordinary people. She was adapting. I had to give her credit for that. But adaptation and success were different things, and her new reality was becoming increasingly distant from the life Griffin had promised her. My phone rang on a Tuesday afternoon. Liora's name appeared on the screen, and for the first time in weeks, I felt genuinely curious about what she might say. "Cole? I hope I'm not bothering you." "Not at all. How are you doing?" She paused, and I could hear traffic in the background. She was probably walking somewhere instead of taking a car service. "I'm okay. This whole situation with Griffin is just really stressful. The investigation, the media attention, everything." "I can imagine. Are you holding up all right?" "Mostly. It's just hard to watch someone you care about go through something like this. And honestly, I've been thinking about you, about us, about how I handled everything." Here it was, the conversation I'd been expecting for weeks. "What about it?" "I think I made a mistake, Cole, not just with how I ended things, but with what I thought I wanted. Griffin's world looked so appealing from the outside, but living in it..." She trailed off. "It's not what I expected." "What did you expect?" "Security, I guess. Stability, a future that felt guaranteed." She laughed, but it sounded hollow. "Turns out nothing's guaranteed, is it?" I looked out my office window at the Austin skyline, at the city where I was building something real and lasting, and completely my own. "No," I said. "Nothing's guaranteed. But some things are more reliable than others." "I heard about your Defense Department contract. That's amazing, Cole. I always knew you had it in you." The lie came so easily that I almost admired her for it. She'd never believed in my potential, never supported my ambitions, never seen anything in me beyond comfortable mediocrity. But now that I was succeeding beyond her expectations, she was rewriting history to include her faith in my abilities. "Thanks," I said. "It's been a lot of work, but it's paying off. Maybe we could have coffee sometime. I know things are complicated with Griffin and everything, but I miss talking to you. I miss having you in my life." I closed my eyes and counted to 5. When I opened them, I was smiling. "I'd like that," I said. "Let me check my schedule and get back to you." "Really? That would be wonderful. I was worried you might not want to see me." "We're friends, Liora. Friends make time for each other." After hanging up, I sat back in my chair and considered the beautiful symmetry of the situation. She was reaching out to me while her new life crumbled, just as I was reaching heights she'd never thought possible. She wanted comfort and familiarity while facing uncertainty and decline, and I was going to give her exactly what she'd asked for. Friendship. Nothing more, nothing less, and certainly nothing like what she was hoping for. Friends, after all, had boundaries, and I was about to show her exactly where mine were. The coffee shop she chose was telling, a local place with mismatched furniture and a chalkboard menu, the kind of spot we used to frequent when money was tight and pretensions were low. Not the sort of establishment Griffin would have been caught in, which was probably the point. Liora was already waiting when I arrived, looking smaller somehow in jeans and a sweater instead of the designer outfits that had become her uniform. She'd lost weight, and her smile seemed fragile around the edges. "You look good," she said as I sat down. "Success agrees with you." "Thanks. You look—" I paused, choosing my words carefully. "You look like you've been through a lot." She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "That's one way to put it. The past few months have been educational." "How's Griffin holding up?" "Not well. The legal fees alone are destroying him, even before they determine whether he actually did anything wrong. And the art thing, even if those pieces turn out to be authentic, the damage to his reputation is probably permanent." I sipped my coffee and waited. This conversation had a destination, and I wanted her to drive. "Cole, I need to tell you something, and I need you to hear me out before you respond." "I'm listening." "I made a terrible mistake, not just in how I ended our marriage, but in what I thought I wanted from life. I got seduced by Griffin's world, by the money and the status and the promise of easy answers to complicated problems. She was building towards something, laying groundwork for a request I could see coming from miles away. "But that world isn't real," she continued. "It's all surface, all performance. There's no substance underneath, no foundation you can actually build on. And when it starts falling apart, there's nothing to catch you." "What are you saying, Liora?" "I'm saying I want to come home. I want to try again, to rebuild what we had before I ruined it. I know that's a lot to ask after everything I put you through, but—" "Stop." The word came out harder than I intended, and she flinched. "Just stop. Cole, please. I know you're angry, and you have every right to be, but I'm not angry." And surprisingly, that was true. I felt many things looking at my ex-wife across this table: pity, disappointment, a kind of clinical fascination. But anger wasn't one of them. "I'm just confused about what you think is happening here. I think we're talking about fixing the biggest mistake I've ever made." "No, we're not. We're friends having coffee, just like you asked. Remember? You said we were better as friends." Her face went pale. That was before I understood what I was giving up, before I realized that security and love aren't the same thing. "But they're not the same thing," I said gently. "You were right about that, and you were right that we're better as friends." "Cole, let me finish. You left me because I couldn't give you the life you wanted. Fair enough. You found someone who could, or at least who promised he could. Also fair. But now that his promises are turning out to be worthless, you want to come back to the security you walked away from." She started to speak, but I held up a hand. "The problem is that I'm not the same person you left. I'm not the guy struggling to make payroll in his spare bedroom. I'm not the guy who needed your validation to feel worthwhile. I'm someone who built something real while you were playing house with a fraud. I know that. I can see how much you've accomplished, and I'm proud of you. Are you? Or are you just attracted to success, regardless of where it comes from?" The question hit like a physical blow. She sat back in her chair, her coffee growing cold between her hands. "That's not fair." "Isn't it? You left me for Griffin because he was successful. Now you want to come back to me because I'm successful. Do you see the pattern? It's not about money. It's exactly about money. It's always been about money. You don't love people, Liora. You love what they can provide." She was crying now, quiet tears that she wiped away with the back of her hand. "That's not true. I loved you. I still love you. You loved the idea of me, the potential you thought you saw, but you never loved me enough to stick around while I figured out how to reach that potential." I stood up, leaving a $10 bill on the table. "We're friends, Liora. That's what you wanted, and that's what we are. Friends don't try to manipulate each other into relationships they don't want. Friends respect boundaries. Cole, please don't leave like this. I'm not leaving angry. I'm leaving clear. Take care of yourself. I hope things work out with Griffin, whatever that looks like. I walked out of the coffee shop and into the afternoon sunlight, feeling lighter than I had in months. Behind me, I could hear her calling my name, but I didn't turn around. Friends, I'd learned, sometimes had to be cruel to be kind. And the kindest thing I could do for Liora was to let her learn to live with the consequences of her choices, just like I had learned to live with mine. 6 months later, I was standing in the ballroom of Austin's most exclusive hotel, surrounded by the city's tech elite, and wearing a tuxedo that cost more than my first car. The Austin Technology Awards were the industry's equivalent of the Oscars, and my company was nominated in 3 categories. We won all 3. Cole Vanton, CEO of Vanton Security Systems, announced the presenter as I walked to the podium for the 3rd time that evening. Winner of this year's Innovation Award for revolutionary advances in military-grade encryption technology. The applause was thunderous. In the audience, I could see Jules grinning like she'd won the lottery, which in a sense, she had. Our company was now valued at $47 million, and her 20% stake had made her independently wealthy overnight. I could also see other faces in the crowd. Investors who'd ignored my calls a year ago, competitors who were now trying to poach my employees, journalists who wanted to write profile pieces about Austin's newest tech success story. And in the back of the room, barely visible in the dim lighting, I could see Liora. She looked good. Not the desperate, diminished version I'd met for coffee, but not the polished socialite she'd been with Griffin either. Something in between, more authentic than either extreme. She was alone, which told its own story about how her life had evolved. "Thank you," I said into the microphone, looking out at the sea of faces. A year ago, this company was just an idea and a lot of stubborn determination. Tonight, we're protecting communications for military units around the world. That transformation happened because of the incredible team we've built, the investors who believed in our vision, and the hard lessons that taught us what we were really capable of achieving. I paused, my eyes finding Liora in the crowd. She was watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read, pride, regret, something that might have been hope. Someone once told me that success isn't about what you build, but about who you become while building it. I used to think that was just motivational nonsense. Now I understand it's the only thing that actually matters. More applause. I thanked the audience, accepted congratulations from fellow nominees, and made my way through the crowd toward the exit. The after-party would go until dawn, but I'd had enough celebration for one evening. "Cole?" I turned to find Liora standing behind me, elegant in a simple black dress that probably came from a department store instead of a designer boutique. She looked nervous, like someone approaching a stranger instead of an ex-husband. "Congratulations," she said. "You deserve this. All of it." "Thank you. How are you doing?" "Better. Different, but better." She smiled, and for the first time in years, it seemed genuine. "I got a job with a nonprofit downtown, marketing for environmental causes. The pay isn't great, but the work actually means something." "That sounds perfect for you." "I think it might be. I'm learning that there are different kinds of success, different ways to measure a life well lived." We stood there for a moment. 2 people who'd shared 5 years and 1,000 dreams, now strangers making polite conversation at a party. "I should go," she said finally. "I just wanted to tell you that I'm proud of you, and that I'm sorry for how everything happened." "I know you are. Do you think—" She hesitated. "Do you think we'll ever really be friends? Not just polite acquaintances, but actual friends?" I considered the question seriously. "Maybe. Someday. When enough time has passed that we can remember the good parts without being haunted by the bad parts. I'd like that. So would I." She smiled again, kissed my cheek gently, and walked away into the crowd. I watched her go, feeling something that might have been closure, or forgiveness, or just the simple recognition that some stories end not with dramatic confrontations, but with quiet understanding. My phone buzzed with a text from Jules. "Where did you disappear to? The investors are asking for you." I typed back, "On my way." But I stood there for another moment, looking out at the city lights through the hotel's floor-to-ceiling windows. Austin sprawled below me like a circuit board, all connections and possibilities and electric potential. Somewhere out there, Griffin was probably meeting with bankruptcy attorneys or federal prosecutors, learning that consequences were the price of choices poorly made. Somewhere else, Liora was driving home to an apartment she could actually afford, building a life based on substance instead of surface. And here I was, standing in a ballroom full of people who wanted to celebrate my success, holding an award that represented everything I'd ever wanted to achieve. The funny thing was that none of it felt like revenge anymore. It just felt like life. Messy, complicated, occasionally beautiful life that had taken unexpected turns and delivered unexpected lessons. I straightened my tie, checked my reflection in the window, and walked back into the party. Jules was right. The investors were waiting, and there was still work to do. But for the first time in longer than I could remember, the work felt like joy instead of obligation, and that, I realized, was the only success that actually mattered. The rest was just numbers on a balance sheet, awards on a shelf, and stories people would tell about the night everything changed. Tonight, I was finally ready to write a new story. One where the hero didn't need to defeat anyone to win, because winning had turned out to be something entirely different than what he'd expected. Something better. Something real. Something that belonged completely and